stress out the importance of this technology. So then if we jump into country strategies, there are different factors that needs to be considered when countries want to deploy this technology within their strategies. For instance, we have to look to the climate change commitments. Some of them have already net zero targets, but also in their long-term strategies, they already mentioned the use of these technologies in order to achieve their objective. It's also important to look at the endowment of geological and energy resources, because in this case, by using the international framework, countries can actually take advantage of their endowment, because not all countries have storage capacity, and also not all countries have renewable energy that they can use for their transition. It's also important to look at the level of emissions and type of economic activities, whether there is a large base on, for instance, production of steel or cement, and also the economic development, because not all countries are online to have the capability to actually transition to net zero by the given time. Then, last but not least, the public perception and acceptance. These technologies need public perception and acceptance because of risks, because of perceived risks, and, but also because of advantages that they can bring to the different stakeholders that are involved. So we conducted a cursory survey taking into account these countries. You will find the link to our report at the end of my presentation. So we are here to stretch that it's a call of action is necessary at international level. This can take the form of, it can take different forms. Specifically, it can be within the COP28 framework and in a form of a political signal coming from head of state, or a political declaration, language in cover decision. But there is also another way, which is through recognition of this technology within the Article 6 and more broadly in carbon markets under the Paris Agreement. In this case, there are already some countries that have done so. For instance, India has already recognized CCS as one of the activities that can provide units under Article 6.2. But then there may be also the possibility of the creation of clubs or coalitions among countries that want to foster the development and deployment of this technology outside of the conventional frameworks. But in order to do so, it's also necessary to create the appropriate international government structure to manage risks associated. I will conclude here by showing you the QR code that you can scan to have access to our report.
Thank you. So the importance of a signal from COP28 in terms of the international cooperation of Article 6 and removals cannot be minimized. It is part of the Paris Agreement. The net zero was always conceived as being net zero global because emissions and removals were not deemed to be taking the same place. So Article 6 was very much seen as one of the pillars of the Paris Agreement as a result of this whole concept. The fact that we're still having problems in the 6.2 and 6.4 room on getting approved for the recommendation of the Supervisory Board on removals in Article 6.4 is something that we hope is just a hiccup, but this is something that will pass, and we'll all see a blue sky after this. We'll stop here, but we'll move on to Philip. Philip Moss, please.
Thank you very much. My name is Philip Moss. I am in my capacity as the Global Director for Technological Carbon Removals at South Pole, also the chair of the NextGen CDR facility, which is one of the largest aggregated sources or coalitions of demand for technological CDRs in the world. So my comments and perspectives today will be from a demand side perspective in terms of what we need to do from the demand side as it relates to long-term durable removals in order to make Article 6 very effective. So thank you very much for the invitation to join this panel. I feel I'm probably the the least informed of anyone here, so it will be a learning experience for me too. Let me tell you a little bit about what NextGen is and what we're trying to do. So I think it was about 3 years ago now, we sat down with a group of institutions talking about the market for carbon removals, the need for carbon removals, recognizing that, obviously there's a huge decarbonization target that we need to hit, 222 gigatons by the end of the decade. I just wanted to add one number to the numbers we just saw on the list. Recently, the UNFCCC high-level climate champions have come out and said we need 3.5 gigatons of removals in addition to the decarbonization by the end of the decade. And of that number, half a gigaton needs to be coming from long-term durable removals. So there is a growing international recognition of the role of removals in addition to decarbonization. And when we sat down with our partners, we said, what can we do to make this effective? How can we incentivize investment coming into the sector? And so what we did was we sat down, we ended up setting up a joint venture called the NextGen CDR Facility, separate company between South Pole, obviously a global climate project consultant and solutions provider, and Mitsubishi Corporation, a large Japanese conglomerate, to provide a demand signal to companies that were looking at the removal space but couldn't necessarily get in there. Apologize if I'm going on a little bit about this, but what we recognized was if we wanted to get projects built, if we wanted to get them certified, if we wanted to have them flow into Article 6 mechanisms and down to the national level, we needed to ensure that there was a price or capital that could flow to them. And so we have an ambition within NextGen to buy 1 million tons of ICROA certified carbon removals and commit that money by 2025 in order to really help kickstart this industry. We have already made some commitments, so we've already bought close to 200,000 tons from a variety of companies, projects I should say. And we are working with a number of multinational buyers, including the likes of Boston Consulting Group, LGT Group, Mitsui OSK Lines from the hard-to-abate sector, which is fantastic, Swiss Re, and large financial company UBS. And so thanks to them, we are able to get some insight as to what is the demand side looking like in the voluntary space, how that may translate across to compliance markets or to national sources of demand, and what are some of the impediments to move forward. So I'll be very brief here. I think there's kind of 3 or 4 key issues that relate to Article 6. I think one key issue that we saw recently is the definition of what a removal means. So there was a recent publication of initial criteria for carbon removals, which caused an uproar in the carbon removal industry because it was limiting. It was really focusing on geological sequestration as a primary way to ensure longevity of the carbon removed. What that means in practice is that you have a number of different innovative technologies, particularly ones which are more readily transferable to the Global South, that cannot be monetized because they wouldn't effectively be ineligible. I'm thinking of things like persistent biochar projects and enhanced rock weathering. We should also recognize that a lot of companies still do not have removals in their NDCs, which creates a lack of incentive. So the UNFCCC again is trying to get countries to sign on to commitments to include removals into their NDCs across the board. You have the issue around crediting periods and whether something that's stored in the ground as a rock for 1,000 years should be treated the same way as an emission reduction, which could be reversed effectively in the next year. And then we also have just this general conflict between communities that are seeing emission reductions and removals as effectively fungible, when in fact they have very different dynamics, very different attributes, and in most cases the funding supporting those activities is coming from different pools of capital. So I'll pause there so that we can continue the discussion.
Very well, thanks, Philip. I think that we will be anxious to hear questions. I'm sure there will be questions directed to you and to Elena. but I had hoped to have Maria here by now, but since Maria hasn't emerged yet, again, I said it takes a while to get from room 6 to here. Go ahead, Lisa.
Thank you. Thank you for having me today. Good afternoon. My name is Jishi. I'm from Climate Change Center. We are the NGO based in South Korea. We are the very first NGO in South Korea dealing with the climate actions. We've been 15 years now. We are doing policy suggestion to the government, raising the awareness, including education for youth and literacy levels. And also, we are doing the climate project directly in cooperation with the developing countries as well. So given the situation and experiences, I would like to share today the current carbon market status and the challenges at the moment. And in the end, I'm gonna speak about a little bit about Paris Agreement Article 6 as well.
I think there's a little hitch that you are not seeing. You're not seeing the presentation right now. It's coming. It's coming.
Yeah,
Okay.
I can do like
There you go. Okay. Go ahead, please.
Okay. Yes. Yeah, Korea, we're taking the ETS at the moment. This is the very first nationwide cap and trade program in Asian region. We were the kind of pioneer in that time, so which was very promising in 2015. We are cover like 6 huge sectors, as you can see on the screen. And also we are taking the allocation with the free allocation and a little bit of auctioning. We are taking mostly domestically, but also we are also taking a little bit of offsetting from the international project as well. As you can see, you see the whole track from phase number 1 through till now. But we had like challenges a lot. When we just started ETS in South Korea, there has been a lot of resistance, like objection from the industry. Why do we have to do this? So phase number 1, we means our government, gave them a 100% free allocation. And then also give them a lot of incentives like subsidiaries as well. And it goes to the phase 2, we had to do something a little bit. So we implemented a little bit of auctioning, which was 3%. But to be honest, as you see, the number is very, very loose in the cap itself. It didn't work very well. So-called, we can say that it's like somewhat failure in terms of carbon market in South Korea, which means that it didn't function properly. So now we are in the middle of phase number 3, and we are expanded auctioning up to 10% as well. But still, we have challenges, as you can see. Yeah, see, the price signal is very important in terms of implementing the carbon market. Though, since we have been like government intervention, and then also sometimes there's a lobbying from the industry and then losing up the cap, so the market didn't work well. So now we are having the price at the US dollar $6 at the moment, which is very low. As you can see, the left side of the graph, it has been decreased a lot. And also, you see the comparison on the right side is that the Korean and the credit price is orange color, whereas the purple is EU ETS, which is like gap between them is 16 times away. So I can say that the price is very important, but because of the circumstances at the moment, it's kind of stuck. So now we are so-called learning by doing by learning. We are trying to reform a little bit of KETS as well. We're now trying to avoid a no free allocation. At the same time, we are trying to lowering the cap as much as we can, and also expanding the market players. We used to have like very limited participation of the players, and now we are also seeing the voluntary carbon market utilization. Just a brief introduction of our organization done from last year. We believe the voluntary carbon market will be the key complementary tool to reduce and remove the emissions. So we launched AURA, which means Alliance for Our Responsible Action, from last year. The role of this one is to boost the movement in South Korea to be part of climate action, not only for the company, but also individuals, the government organization as well. As you can see, the carbon market really has to be linked with the NDC target. Well, actually, we have huge ambitious goal in NDC, South Korea. We announced to reduce by up to 40% from the level of 2018, which is very challenging for us. But as you can see, we've just revised the earlier this year. We used to have huge burden in the industry, but now we have to separate a little bit of burden to the CCUS and international mitigation outcome, so-called Paris Agreement Article 6. So now we have to really focus on the CCUS and international mitigation outcome. Though CCUS in South Korea is also kind of early stage, but now our government is trying to put more money or investment in CCUS, which means that removal of the removal itself will be very crucial in dealing with the climate actions and also realizing the NDC goal as well. Yes, so we are also expanding the international cooperation, so-called Article 6.2. We are now having bilateral agreement with these 5 countries, but now we're also seeing the more than 20 countries. And I believe that I've just talked about carbon market itself, but it's not only for the compliance market, but it's also for the voluntary carbon market and the Article 6.2 market as well. So we now have to really focus on we have to recover the credibility of Korean carbon market at the moment. And I believe that the CCUS and technology, digital, and those kind of things will help to move forward. Yeah, that's it for me.
Thank you. And I want to, as I mentioned, welcome also Maria Jishi, who is the negotiator on Article 6 for the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Maria will have to go to other duties, so I will. She was meant to be before you, but so I'll give her the floor. Also, to some degree, Maria, I think it would be interesting for you, for the audience, to hear the discussion about Article 6 and removals and what is happening in 6.4 and 6.2 and what is the sense from the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Circular carbon economy is an important element for the kingdom. I think that, as far as I remember, CCS and CDM from the Cancun COP, there was a discussion where Saudi was also very, very strong on this. So please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Andre, and my apologies all for my late arrival. I was on the podium co-facilitating 6.2, and the parties did not release me until very late. And then I'm heading straight back to that. So apologies for the very constrained time and for skipping the line of speakers. But I think the circular carbon economy approach, which was endorsed by all G20 countries during the presidency of Saudi Arabia during G20, is extremely important to us to look at the entire life cycle of emissions and make sure that when we're tackling emissions, especially in the context of Paris Agreement, we're really having a holistic view of what it is that we are deploying and that what we are implementing somewhere along the value chain does not accidentally result in an increase in emissions somewhere lower down the value chain. And so the circular carbon economy approach is really the cornerstone for how we're choosing to approach our climate targets and climate goals. And with that, I will say that the Saudi Pavilion is right next door. You guys are more than welcome to wander over and see it. There's also a pavilion in the Green Zone for Saudi Green Initiative. which talks about all of the amazing initiatives that are being undertaken within the country to try and reduce emissions and also try and tackle removals of emissions. It includes CCS and carbon capture and storage. So switching a little bit from that to my role in the supervisory body and the work that's being done there on the documents that provide guidance or recommendations to CMA for activities involving removals and how the methodologies that are being developed for those activities need to go and what needs to be contained in those methodologies. I think one, the meetings are all recorded, and so if you're interested and have plentiful of time on your hands, you are more than welcome to go and watch the hours and hours and hours of discussion that are living somewhere on the internet. And if not, the recommendations have been annexed to the supervisory body report that's currently under consideration by CMA. And the recommendations, I would say, are, upon first glance, some would say extremely concerning. And I would say first glance because oftentimes the people who are reading these documents have a perspective of where they come from. So the forest people read the removal document and think of the forests. The tech people read the removal documents and think of the technologies that can be deployed. And then each group is annoyed by different things that are contained in the documents that they feel do not apply to the specific types of projects that they would undertake. But because the mandate that came to the SB was for a general guidance on all activities involving removals, how they could address reversals, how they would address monitoring, how long the monitoring would go for, how they would assess and safeguard their impacts to ensure environmental integrity. It was very, very difficult to come up with something that is as concrete as some would like. And so the majority of the guidance is really saying our recommendations are going to be somewhere between A and B, but that will be dependent on activity type. And we hope that you all, as parties, will let us continue the work to elaborate on what would be applicable to type A and what would be applicable to type B, and also exploring the different things that are coming up because we don't want to be a hindrance to technology development. We want to actually make sure that what we're doing would have a space for the things that are strong enough to withstand all the eligibility requirements to be able to join the efforts that are being undertaken under the Article 6.4 mechanism. So not to exclude the emerging technologies and emerging approaches that are for the future. And with that, I will also say that the discussions within the Article 6 room on 6.4 have so far been extremely interesting because the views are very divergent in terms of what is necessary to operationalize and what isn't. And we're having all of these conversations in a time where some countries and parties are actually already operationalizing. And so to be talking about the contents of a letter of authorization that needs to be annexed to an initial report when we know that there are countries who have already submitted their initial report for review to the Secretariat is a little bit, it feels a little bit like we're in a room that is kind of separate from what's happening outside and gives me the feeling that I'm talking underwater and that I'm floating, but some would say that clarity is necessary, and then others would say it's already clear. In fact, people are implementing it, but the process emerges with time, and so for the next 2 weeks, we'll see how the discussions evolve across all of the agenda items. And then I just want to touch very quickly on the true essence of cooperation in my personal view, which is the non-market approaches under Article 6.8 that don't actually involve the exchange of any kind of emission reduction credits or offsets from one country to another, but in fact kind of goes down to the true essence of cooperation, which is cooperating to achieve emission reductions or adaptation with mitigation co-benefits by providing technology, capacity building, and financial support. And I'll stop here because I really have to run. So
Okay,
thank you for having me.
All right. Maria, just, and I'm sorry to my colleague, if there are any questions, maybe we can take one or two questions. Is that okay? You're polite, so thank you very much for that. There's one question at the back and another question here, and that's about, I think after that she's going to have to run. So would you stand up, please? And there's a microphone coming somewhere. There it is. It's on its way. Let's make it short and quick, please.
Hi, my name is Nick de Swart from the Zimbabwe Carbon Association. My question is with regards to conditionally funded NDCs and how, when a government trades those NDCs under Article 6 and receives funding for the offset, how do they then create the emission reduction in country to fulfill their NDC, because they've effectively sold it to someone else?
And there's a second question in here, the gentleman here. So Maria, maybe you can untangle that, because I think that it's a very simple question. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, sorry, good afternoon. My name is Jigme Tenzin. I work developing carbon projects on the voluntary carbon market. Just a quick question, like you are quite involved in this Article 6 negotiation, so because we feel that, I personally feel that there is always say the voluntary carbon market will be recognized by Article 6, but I'm just wanted to kind of get a view from you, when will that happen? Like, will that be a kind of a straight rule saying, yes, Article 6.4 will recognize these standards? Do we expect some kind of a decision or some kind of guidance from Article 6, be it under 6.2 or under 6.4? Thank you.
Yeah, both of them very easy, Maria. So to the best of your ability at this time.
Thank you very much. I question the level of my involvement in Article 6. Let me start there. I have to sit with myself a lot and wonder, why am I here and why am I allowing all of this to happen to me? I don't sleep when I come to COP. But I'm going to work my way backwards, because I think the answer to your question is actually quite simple. I don't think that the 6.4 mechanism is planning to recognize any voluntary carbon market as a standard that is acceptable to the 6.4 mechanism. The mechanism is in fact setting out its own standards and rules that are very much Paris aligned, and if my understanding of voluntary carbon markets is correct, and I try to avoid venturing into that world, but to my understanding, all of the VCMs have emerged post-Kyoto, and none of them have really fully adapted to the Paris world, and to recognize them under the 6.4 mechanism would not be conducive to a way forward, and so I don't think that is even a topic under discussion within the supervisory body, nor do I think it will be at any point in time in the near future. Significant changes would need to occur before that conversation can ever even be broached. But to also attempt to answer your question, I really don't know if I'm the best person to provide that answer, because none of our NDCs are conditional in Saudi. But I don't also know if conditional NDCs means carbon markets and the financing from carbon markets as a fulfillment of that condition in order to achieve the NDCs. And in fact, what you asked me is the question that we continuously wonder. What happens after a country has sold its ITMOs? How is it going to achieve its emission reductions to be able to achieve its NDCs? And if it has come out with net zero targets and the net zero targets are linked to a year, what happens then? Because you could possibly sell the ITMOs that are in excess of your NDCs today, but does that mean that you would be able to still achieve your net zero target eventually, or does that mean that you're essentially giving yourself a handicap from being able to achieve it as you work through the different NDC cycles and the increasing ambition with time? And it's certainly something that we take seriously in Saudi. We're having many conversations about it internally. And I think it's also a conversation that's being had by the supervisory body about what to do and what kind of guidance could be provided to host parties, if any, in order to get them thinking about this before they sign away all of their mitigation to countries who are kind of early movers and shakers at this point in time. So sorry, maybe that's not an answer, but it's the best answer I could provide at this point in time. And thank you very much, Andre, for having me. I really have to run.
Yeah, no, I know, Maria.
Appreciate
We have something that I want to give to you. I'll give everybody, but this is something.
Thank you so much. Really
It's a paper that Article 6 and CDR, but this is a new signature T-shirt from ERCST.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much. Sorry, guys. Thank you.
Well, apologies, Mr. Lee. I wish that we had a better way to handle this. Life is imperfect. We manage as we can, so please go ahead.
Okay, so hi, my name is Lucas, and I serve as the Chief Technology Officer at the company of Turkey. And Turkey itself is just a software company, and I think with the various mechanism of the Article 6, we think that I firmly believe that the information technology should work a crucial role in shaping the future of Article 6. So I think that's why I'm invited here. So yeah. So today I'm going to discuss about how information technology can achieve a sustainable future. So there are three key functions that we have to discuss about what IT can do about the carbon market to transform future. So IT can fix these double counting and unverified users and greenwashing issues. Everybody talks about this, but it is still not solved. But we are still working on to develop new functions to make this more sustainable futures. But let's just dive into more details about what IT can do inside. So about the data source of the carbon credit developers, there are just a complete full of data, and like also the standards databases are inside, including compliance market level and voluntary market level. Every data are just located and just flying around, and every data is quite distributed, and so there needs to have one connections about like how we can achieve this, how we can solve this carbon market in the next level. So I am just a blockchain developer, so I'm going to discuss about the blockchain. So how we can achieve Carbon Market 3.0 about leveraging IT through the blockchain. So with the blockchain itself, it can solve the data integrity, and it can solve the verifications issue of the user accounts, and it can also solve the transparency by accurately accounting and tracking those data. So I have previously mentioned about the three functions that should be solved. So double counting can be solved as a timestamp, which is tracking those timestamp number inside of the blockchain. And also the verification process can be solved as by verifying the transaction ID also inside of the blockchain data. Also with the greenwashing itself, we can create a transparent registry inside by using the blockchain functions. I'm not just gonna talk about that like blockchain can fix everything. It still has some sort of problems, and it has to be some issues that needs to be fixed. but I'm pretty sure it can dedicate, and it can help make the carbon market to the next level. So this is the chart that our company is sharing about the software. So within the blockchain, all the separated data sources, which is just coming from the developers whoever's making a carbon credit, and also registered in the inventories and also in the market infrastructure inside of the carbon trading platform, can be assessed into one if we use a blockchain technology inside. So with one user account, whoever holds a wallet and has the possibility to assess those data sources, and then the a lot of carbon markets, distributed carbon markets around. So yeah, well, the key itself, this is, I am also running the voluntary carbon credit trading platform, which is called Lucia. And it's in the Korea pavilion, so if you guys have some time, please feel free to reach out to us and we can talk about more about the blockchain. And if you guys want to know about more about the NFTs and how we can achieve the carbon market 3.0, just feel free to come reach out to us. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for your presentations, all of you. I think we have some time left that would allow us to go into a deeper discussion about Article 6 and operationalization. I mean, some of you are practitioners, some of you are service providers. We're a think tank that have some policy ideas as to where this COP should be going on Article 6 and implementation and the areas of implementation. But we're looking for some comments and questions from you, and to the degree that we can answer them or we can debate them in this room here. Go ahead, please, ma'am. Sachi, there's a lady here that would like the microphone.
Thank you very much. My name is Juliette from New Climate Institute. I have a question for Mrs. Kin because there is something I didn't understand in your presentation. You talked about the VCM and then you talked about buying ITMOs, and I was a bit confused. I mean, in the context of the ETS, you talked about using the VCM, and then in the context of the NDC, you talked about ITMOs, so I was a bit confused. Thank you.
I think we'll take one more question if there is, so maybe there's a conversation that emerges. But if not, why don't you go ahead first, please, Ms. I think it was to you. Yeah, I think it was for her, right? Yeah.
Okay, thank you for your question. I think your question was something related to the Paris Agreement Article 6.2, ITMO, and the VCM, right? Am I correct?
It was in your presentation. You said one of the reform points to make the Korean ETS stronger is using the VCM, the voluntary carbon market.
Oh.
And then later you talked about ITMOs, so I was confused.
Okay, let me clarify a little bit. The reason why I mentioned the VCM was that at the moment, ETS in South Korea has some kind of challenges, which means that we cover almost like 70% of GHG in South Korea using the ETS, but ETS, it doesn't function well. So thinking about the ultimate purpose of carbon market, we have to deal with the climate action somehow. But now we cannot only focus on the compliance market, domestic market only. So there comes a voluntary carbon market, has to be complementary tool to move forward. So that's why I mentioned the VCM. And as an NGO, we have to have a duty to boost more movement our market in South Korea globally as well. So I'm thinking that VCM will be those playing those kind of role in terms of complement those kind of movement. Whereas I mentioned the ITMO in the Paris Agreement Article 6.2 is that as a viewing the carbon market, there are a lot of mechanisms, not only VCM, also like domestic compliance market, and also Paris Agreement Article 6.2. So I'm mentioning that as a whole carbon market, there are a lot of mechanisms, but we have to see that like there is a underlining core principle, which is integrity, transparency, credibility. So in that sense, I mentioned all of the mechanism.
Is that answer your questions? Somewhat. Okay, if you want to continue, by all means, I'm just looking at other people. Go ahead, if you...
I don't know if you, the question by the gentleman was not answered before. I also had this question, the first one, so meaning what happens if you have a conditional NDC and you use ITMOS for this? There is a risk of double counting or double claiming there. And you said this is you said it's a very simple question.
It was a jest. It was not a serious statement. It was a statement, an ironic statement, or a statement in jest, whatever you want to call it. I tell you what, I've been in meetings where the chair kind of monopolizes the microphone and speaks, and I'm not that kind of chair, so I can hide behind the fact that I'm chairing. I'll be happy to answer and to take questions, but I think my role is to help more the panel to answer these things rather than me. But if you provoke that question, I would argue that you have very clear, an NDC is an NDC. And if you need to meet your NDC, you're going to have to use ITMOS. And if you're exporting ITMOS, whether you still have to meet your NDCs, how do you meet it? Maria was saying this is a big mystery. It's not a big mystery. The mystery is that you have to get some, if you are a state, basically the Brazilians said at some point, well, if I sell NDCs, if I sell ITMOs, I take the liability at the state and the private sector gets the money. That was kind of their logic, which is not illogical. So the whole trick is that the state gets something out of it as well. And in many cases, you will see many parties, not necessarily all, but many parties are considering setting up some kind of a royalty or some kind of a fund to make up for the ITMOs that they have sold. So that is kind of how people would imagine what happens when you sold your ITMOs. How do you make it up? You make it up. Basically, the responsibility, the state approves it, but then they have the responsibility to meet their NDC. So either they get some money from the money that flows in as a result of the sale of the ITMOs, or the state uses, the backstop this and uses its own funding and own financing to make up the ITMOs that have been exported. I'm not sure that there's too many other ways that you can do this stuff. I'm not sure that answers quite the question. Is there anyone else? Because I'm looking here. Look, we are in a situation here that Article 6 is a great hope, but in the end right now is developing very little, is delivering very little. And there are obviously those that like markets, as always have been, and those that question the existence of markets. And when it comes to removals, especially CDRs, removals, things of that sort, that gets more contentious for many. So this is kind of the conversation we're into now. Sorry, you had a question, please.
Yeah, thank you. I'm Gregor Sala from GIZ, and I have a question, I guess a comment. Firstly, a question also to South Korea. You mentioned on the Article 6.2 corporations, I think the UAE, if I'm not mistaken. I would be interested to learn more about the nature of this corporation, who is actually the buyer and who is the seller, and in which sectors is this corporation taking place. And a comment also kind of circling back to what Juliette has just said. I also haven't fully grasped yet how the VCM is supporting the ETS. For me, the more obvious choice would, of course, be lowering caps and actually not giving away 90% of the allowances for free.
Go ahead, please. No, go ahead.
Okay.
I think people are thinking and they're becoming more courageous as the time goes by. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you for your question. I think I have two questions from you. First of all, 6.2, Article 6.2. To be honest, I'm saying I'm a prospective NGO. I'm not from the government representative, but we are working closely with the government. We are in between government and private sector in South Korea. So I'm saying that that those bilateral history, 5 countries, is somewhat we had some like relationship before, or like we try to knock the door every countries, and we finally got the bilateral agreement. So like it goes like how it develops at the moment. So literally we have 5 at the moment in terms of bilateral agreement. But also our Ministry of Foreign Affairs trying to expand that cooperation as well. And then from the view from the government, they're also seeking the relationship from the private sector. Because, as I said before, in Korean ETS, we are using the offsetting credit from the International Mitigation Project, like CDM, which means that we have a little open up the international mitigation allowances getting from the international the project. So that given those situations, we have experiences doing the climate project overseas, which means that we already have a relationship private level. So that government will also expand their relationship. Also, they're looking to the bottom-up approach from the private sector to be part of this project. About sector, there's no boundary. The climate doesn't have a boundary, no boundary in country as well. So we are doing as much as we can at the moment. So that will be my answer for the first question. And about that, I think the very consecutive question from her to you as well. In terms of, how to say, the boundary VCM and ETS, ETMO, at the moment in Korea, we have some kind of boundaries, which means that globally, the boundaries between those kind of things are blurred a little bit, little by little. But in terms of in Korea, to make that integrate, I think the regulation should be, should be settled down. But to be honest, the voluntary carbon market has been issues recently as well. We are pursued to broaden up the voluntary carbon market in South Korea. We are trying to use the voluntary carbon market, but in terms of regulation, it's not setting. It has not settled down yet. So that we trying to merge in the future, but at the moment, it's very separately. Like ETS itself is, So that's why I mentioned the complementary tool.
The gentleman at the back, there's someone at the back, easy to pass the mic.
Yes, hello. Nathan Abad from the European Union. I have a question on price setting. There's been some talk about how prices are set on the voluntary carbon market and also like under the Article 6 mechanism. Of course, contrary to ETS, there's not a cap in the voluntary carbon market, and there's not a cap neither as far as we don't consider NDCs as a cap in the Article 6 mechanism. So I was wondering if you could enlighten us about how do you think, what the factors are that will make the price be set in the voluntary carbon market and on the Article 6 agreements and mechanism?
Well, I'm not sure there's anybody who's quite playing in the voluntary carbon market. There are people, maybe somebody in the, I'm not going to point fingers, but there are people that I know are in this market, but I'm not going to point. While somebody makes up their mind, I will just say to you that the general, I'm not an economist, but I've done enough in my life to tell you that it's a matter of supply and demand. And the fact of the matter is there's not and market liquidity. The reason why there is a EU price, because there's liquidity in the EU market, in the UA market, that's, no matter how you turn it, the fundamentals of the spreads and the volumes and the market participations are there. In the voluntary market is, by and large, a bilateral market or with very little velocity in general. So the setting of the market, it becomes a somewhat intransparent mechanism. At least at this point, I think there are those who believe in the voluntary markets, who hope to get into higher level of liquidity. I would hesitate to go further than this for the simple reason that I will say very flat out, we as ERCST, me, we're not a big player and a big actor in a voluntary market. We're regulatory people and we're compliance people. That's who we are. You know, sorry about that. That's reality. I'm not going to badmouth it any worse than that. Anybody else wants to come across? Go ahead, please.
I'll discuss that in the context of the technological carbon removal market, because there is a lot of kind of noise out there about, you know, let's start with how much money is flowing into the space. Is this mitigation deference? And I think the price point is really the primary example you can point to as to why this is not the case. Just before I specifically respond to that, I do want to point out, if you look at the technological carbon removal space, to date, in terms of commitments, both now and in the future, which is what we are doing for the most part at NextGen, there's only been 5 million tons. That's it. Of that amount, about 150,000 tons have actually been delivered. This is not a huge liquid market, to your point. That's what makes the market effective. And so, you know, when we are looking at the technological carbon removal market, you said a price cap or a price floor, effectively some sort of a tax mechanism, effectively, right? I think every price point we're seeing across the board in the voluntary market for other types of assets is lower than what we're seeing in the technological carbon removal space today. So we have projects that we're looking at that range from the hundreds of dollars a ton to the thousands of dollars a ton. It's a very, very different market. And within NextGen, what we're trying to do is create a platform that allows companies to come in. We think the price point is good. I don't know if countries want to look at this as a benchmark for their pricing. But we have an average target price across our portfolio, which we manage across a range of technologies, of $200 a ton. So just in terms of putting a price point out there, that's where we feel the voluntary market is very uncomfortable, but still somewhat willing to pay. You see prices transacting at higher costs, but lower volumes. So I think the point is that trying to come at this from a price point perspective and use that as the incentive structure to provide the safeguards for the industry may not be the best approach to it. It may be worth looking at what the industry needs to thrive, and then from an Article 6 perspective, what do buyers in the voluntary market need and look for in order to be able to transact? Because if we overcomplicate it, if we provide moving goalposts for the private sector, they're not going to participate at all.
Look, one thing, you know, if you are from the EU, I see you have a pink badge. I know which part of the EU delegation you are. But you'll know as well as I do and others in this room that the EU does not provide a market for international credits. End of story. And now they are considering removals, or the possibility of consideration of removals in the ETS post 2026 sometime maybe. And international removals is not on the table yet, but some of us are pushing hard for that. So it is, you know, again, the demand is not there for many things. You can argue, for instance, that you can create a carbon storage obligation, in which case you'll create a scarcity, then in which case you'll put a price because there's a scarcity. The moment there's scarcity, there's a price. For the moment, there is for instance, in this particular part of credit, there is an obligation in the Net Zero in Industry Act in the EU to provide 50 million tons of removal of storage capacity. It's great. The question is, if that's the supply, where's the demand? And there's no demand at this point because you can't use it for anything. You can't use it for your ETS compliance. You can use it because it makes you feel good. But in general, companies will not spend that kind of 200 euros a ton to feel good. I'm very sorry, but that's reality. There's a question. Oh yes, I didn't want to prompt you, but there you go. If you want to pass the mic up.
Yes,
yeah, I was being a gentleman.
Thank you. My name is Jörg Füchsler from Infras, and maybe just our perspective on the prices. I think the voluntary market is really in a special situation right now, right? Because this is also a regulatory market, basically, and therefore some think that the regulations are quite weak at this point in time. Therefore, the market is also very heterogeneous, scattered, and you have rather low prices. I mean, typically, prices are in the order of a multiple of the transaction costs, which are $1 per ton, for instance, and this will not change anytime soon if the regulation stays that weak. And of course, I think with that money, if you have $3-4 per ton, you can't actually implement new projects, right? And I think there are initiatives such as the ICVCM that try to bring a higher bar. And if they succeed, that could also help to bring prices upwards. You see also, for instance, with the Swiss Article 6 program, their prices are already higher. And I would estimate that you would need more like $30-50 per ton to actually do something which is additional to what you would do anyway.
You see, one of the things that was being said in the room of Article 6, I should have been there, but anyway, I made a commitment because this is our side event. You need new people, you need new people, you need new people. The reality is very simple, is that in the time of the CDM, we didn't have the question of bringing new people because there was demand. And there was money on the table and people flocked. It's as simple as this, you couldn't keep them away. The fact of the matter is that there is little demand right now because countries are reluctant reluctant to allow the use for compliance of international credits for a variety of reasons, and each they will have different reasons. But there's also, to some degree also, there is a supply problem because also giving a corresponding adjustment approval by a senior diplomat in a bureaucrat in a developing country is not an easy thing to achieve always. People are very concerned to be seen as being given away an export that may increase in value and that a country may need. So these are, most of them are solvable, but they are not solved. And then there are the nice people here like Maria and my colleagues that are still haggling over some very fundamental things in Article 6. For instance, Article 6.2, which is what meant in Paris, that would be a bilateral agreement between two parties that they would agree on how they do business together, with then being transparent, and if they did something naughty, then the world would call them on it. There's an increased lack of comfort on the part of many negotiators, many parties that are volens nolens trying to renegotiate the agreement and make this a lot more constrained. So you'd have some parties that continue to have the view that, well, wait a second, we agreed that this is the bilateral business and we'll set the standards. The others said, no, you can't do this. Therefore, they're gridlocked, and with 8 years outside the Paris Agreement. The other thing that translates into infrastructure. What gets connected to what? Does the national registry? I mean, these are very esoteric stuff, and frankly, I hate it myself. But it's reality. We've created a very complex, because of the structure of the Paris Agreement, we've created a very complex market as opposed to the Kyoto market, which is simple and stupid and everybody could understand it. In this case, what do? You have national registries. They can't even agree what a national registry is. Is a national registry a transactional registry, or is it what they call it, a pull and view, or whatever the heck they call it, and it is just something, an information collection tool. So these are some very fundamental differences. Sounds esoteric, sounds silly, but they're very, very important and dear to some countries, some very big countries. I'm not going to name them here, which are strong enough to kind of try to hold on to what they want. So yes, we have a demand problem, we have a supply problem, and we have an unresolved problem here. We hope that some of it will be solved, or most of it will be solved, inshallah, but it hasn't been solved yet. So again, I'm giving you my 2 cents as a negotiator. You know, I'm here now. My colleagues are not. Anyone else that would like to raise any questions? Again, I don't want to discourage you. I think it's for people like you to go and encourage them all to do this. It is not meant to be negative. It's more to go to your delegation. If you have a pink badge, if you have a whatever badge, go and influence whoever you have and say, we need to have this stuff. We need to make it operational.
If I could just
Philip.
echo your thoughts. I think that's, you know, we're discussing how do we operationalize Article 6, and I think what we're seeing in terms of discussions with governments is the best way to operationalize it is to start piloting and doing some of these projects so we can learn. So we have examples at the moment working with governments that are doing Article 6 transactions that are successful, Switzerland and Thailand, for example. And then we have others where there's one country that wants to do it, another country that wants to do it, but because of the infrastructure internally as to how to interpret Article 6 and these issues of corresponding adjustments, etc., those deals are not moving. But we don't find those issues out until we actually try and do it. So I would echo what you said, Andre. I think a lot of this is for all of you to go back to your home countries and encourage your governments to start trying to do transactions through Article 6, and then we will find what are the issues that we need to unblock.
Or the alternative, we all troop out of here and we march on the central building there and demand that they solve the problems. I'm not sure how that is going to stand out, but with something that we can try. Any other comments or questions? Because I think this is something that it's, in the end, the net zero comes from this. There's a lady there at the back. Sachi, do you have, who has the microphone? It's like Ronald Reagan, who has the microphone?
Thank you very much for the very interesting presentations. My name is Alessandra Fidanza from Italy. I have a general question. This very important event is about how to operationalize Article 6. So far, we discussed about carbon markets and voluntary markets, so Article 6.2 and 6.4. Any hints about the future of Article 6.8 or possible connections between Article 6.8 activities and 6.4 pilot projects, ideas, or your view or opinion? Thank you very much.
Well, the first thing that I would say, madam, is that you actually missed the train by about 15 minutes, because if there's somebody who is very serious with the Saudis, would be extremely serious. They are kind of LMDCs and basic and whatever, the LMDCs. So they would have answered you that in a very clear way. I think we all have different views on the use of Article 6.8. My sense, I know that the Brazilians and other Amazonian countries are working on a proposal, or I will have a proposal here about cooperation under Article 6.8. For instance, we would, you know, as ERCST, in all modesty, we would, you know, there was an effort here at the very beginning to introduce an agenda item that dealt with unilateral trade measures. Unilateral measures, which was, you know, in other words, in polite terms, somebody didn't want to say CBAM. And it's still on the agenda, it's just not a separate agenda item. We always thought, for instance, that this is something that risks a trade war at some point, because as it becomes more acute, it is going to take over. But Article 6.8 could make a unilateral measure into a collaborative measure in some way. Again, how do you do this? We have, again, a number of ideas. But, you know, the only thing that what people will say is what it is not. And it is not about kind of transfer of credits, money and versus credit. That it is not. As to what it is exactly, I think there are incipient thinking, but it's much less well developed, I would say, than the thinking, unfinished thinking of Article 6.2 and 6.4. That would be my answer to you. in terms of being used as pilot and so on, I haven't heard that, but it's always possible. I may turn out to be wrong. There are, for instance, there are efforts of large solar projects in North Africa that would tie into underwater cables into Italy or Southern Europe. I mean, that's a collaboration, because Article 6 is not about markets. Article 6 is about international cooperation, and in 6.2 and 6.4 it happens to be markets. But this is like, I don't know, 10% of the possible collaboration. The rest of 90% is not there. I mean, it's ideas that people can bring in, as long as they find the UN flag and the UN 6.8 useful for something. The thing is, if I have a project like a solar project in North Africa that I want to bring my power to Southern Europe, what does me getting in bed with Article 6.8 get me? What do I get from that? I get a headache. But other than that, what does it get me? Article 6.2 and 6.4, I get recognition. I get an ITMO. I get a blue flag. I get a corresponding adjustment. I get something. The question, nobody's answering the question, what do I get by doing 6.8? I'm sorry, I mean, there are other people who are more qualified, and Maria was much better qualified. Yeah, go ahead.
Yes, I would like to add something on this. So in my opinion, I also think that it's maybe too early to start talking about and seeing project in Article 6.8 because there is no clear definition of what these non-market approaches are. And actually, even within negotiations, especially when it comes to removals, parties are not even sure what list or what technologies they are including under the removal. So in my understanding, any approach under 6.8 will be everything that is not included in 6.2, 6.8, so in 6.4, sorry. So then we need first to clarify this, and then it will come later.
But as you've heard from some, even with an unfinished agenda, with an unfinished infrastructure, countries, whether the Swiss Confederation or Norway or others, are doing things. And in the end, it's possible, like in many cases, the regulation is going to have to catch up with the reality. You want to call it voluntary market, you want to call it an early Article 6 and waiting for the rules. I think it's getting there. It's just a matter of the scale that we were hoping for and that the scale that is needed in order to get to net zero, as opposed to the scale we're seeing now. Will Article 6 in the end deliver the scale that we want? I would argue, Philip, that you are the game in town. I would argue that in the end, when the chips come down, the only thing that is to be traded is removals, because everybody's got an NDC, everybody's got a lower NDC, so it's going to get increasingly difficult. Except that everybody's going to need removals at some point. So either nature-based or the great hope of technological removals that we hope to see. Rob, I have a gentleman there. Let me give him the mic. Rob Stowe.
Thank you. This question may reflect my not having kept up with the discussions on Article 6, but in considering how to implement Article 6, I wanted to ask about the interaction between 6.4 and 6.2. So the supervisory body sets up rules and regulations as to how a credit might be recognized under 6.4 and therefore allowed to be sold. Under 6.2, governments may recognize 6.4 credits, which have been approved as ITMOs, I believe. So the first part of my question is, does the supervisory body have anything to say about that, since these are 6.4 credits? Likewise, looking at it from another direction, Article 6.2 in practice, that means for largely the Swiss bilateral relationships. Article 6.2 has become an emissions reduction credit system. There isn't any prospect of recognition of ITMOs in linkage systems, which some of us had hoped would be the case, and that probably won't happen anytime soon. But, why would either the private sector or the governments that, have to jump in and say this is an ITMO, choose to implement projects under 6.2 rather than 6.4 if both in practice have turned out to be emissions reduction credit systems? I hope those questions make sense and that they're useful questions.
Well, I already broken my rule, Rob, a few times today, so I'm looking at other people to answer this. I'm happy to, but again, it cannot be the chair answering.
Maybe I can try. The intervention from the government or other private sector to be part of Article 6, you're questioning about that, right? I think it's a very unique perspective from South Korean situation, I think. There are a lot of background from the private sector to be part of Article 6, but we believe at the moment in Korea, we see that this opportunity as another, finding out another overseas market. Like private sectors have their climate technology. We are developing a lot of technology supported by government sometimes, and they're making their technology by themselves as well. And now, as you might know, Korea is a very small country. We don't have any natural resources. Only thing we have is the human resources. Like we have to develop the technology. And then normally when we do the climate project, we will need the technology. So using those kind of circumstances, some point from the South Korean circumstances, we see the potential market using the climate project as well. That's a part of the perspective, not all the whole, but ultimately climate action. But yeah, it's a part of that would be.
What I would add to that, Rob, is if you go from here to a session, which is I'll tell you in a moment where it is. There's a joint 6264 session. It's like a session of joint session of Congress and kind of thing. Look, I mean, the moment you issue, it depends, because there's still a lot of interpretation and people having different views. But it's generally accepted that a 6.4 unit being issued, then it starts behaving as an ITMO somehow. And as to how countries will accept them or not accept them, I think it's also going to depend very much on the individual taste and appetite of countries, whether they like. It will become another standard. I mean, in the end, look, 6.4 is, if you want to be very callous, 6.4 is a standard. 6.4 is a standard. And then there's 1,200,000 other standards under 6.2. And once you create a 6.4 unit, it becomes one amongst, it just identifies being a 6.4 with the benefits of the credibility of the UN process and the UN flag and the UN approval. It's like buying IBM. Remember the old days when they say nobody got fired for buying IBM? Well, kind of it's a little bit like that. If presumably nobody's going to get fired for buying 6.2. You may get fired for buying 6.2 and I don't know what credit, but 6.4 you say, well, it's the UN guys.
It's safe.
I'm not sure whether it answers the question, but that's kind of the way I see it.
When is the session, the joint?
The joint session of Congress is at meeting room 6 at 3 o'clock. Be there. Go ahead, there's a gentleman here in front.
My name's Ethan Weiss. I'm a student at Swarthmore College. I attended the session that was right before this meeting. and it was about the evolution of the voluntary carbon market. There was representatives from the ICVCM, former chairs of the CDMs, but the kind of overarching message was that the goal of VCMs is to find best common practices that can be applied across all of the smaller VCMs, all of the smaller domestic carbon trading markets, and hopefully all of those would be integrated into 6.4. I wish Maria was still here to comment on that, because she has said that the negotiators of 6.4 have no intention of incorporating voluntary carbon markets. But I was wondering what your opinions were about whether or not those two different systems are integratable, or if they really are that distinct that they can't be mended.
Well, let me start by saying I am not an Article 6 expert, so take this with a grain of salt. But what I will say is that for Article 6 to be effective, Article 6.4 in particular, there is going to need to be a source of demand for that. That demand, I think, is going to have to be a compliant source of demand. So to the point that I think the point was mentioned that voluntary carbon markets may not be integrated in Article 6. I think what you'll see is voluntary carbon markets adjust and adapt to be aligned with what Article 6 has in place. I think you're already starting to see that in terms of certain jurisdictions asking for contracts, looking to make them IPMOs in the future, although they may not be quite there yet. I mean, I think that it all comes down to, you know, the point that that you need to have that certainty around what you're transacting. So when I'm talking to my buyers and buyers in the market, I don't think anyone has an intention of trying to transact CDRs through Article 6 at the moment. That's, you know, we are having discussions with some governments who are interested, but the voluntary buyers are not. You know, they're saying, let's wait till we get the compliance demand in place. I can see how this impacts me from a compliance perspective, and then we will look to transact through that market. So I think in order to get there, we need to work with the voluntary carbon market and ensure we have, you know, a few key pillars. These are the same pillars, I would say, applying to, you know, emission reductions as they do to long-term carbon removal. So those three things are effectively: one, do you have additionality there in these projects? Two, is there a robust certification and assessment process, right? And bearing in mind that the market's constantly evolving, you know, for us in the tech removal space, you know, a lot of these projects don't have methodologies right now. There aren't necessarily standards that can bring them in and certify them. A lot of this, you know, there's a lot of scientific uncertainty around certain types of approaches. And so I think that's that last thing is how do we get that certainty or high degree of confidence around that certainty, in my case, for the storage of that removal, done obviously in a responsible manner. But, you know, you need those fundamental key pillars of the security, the confidence, and the trust in the asset, as well as how are you going to generate the demand for Article 6 to be effective. And right now, we're still working through a lot of those issues.
Yes, let me go to Elena.
Yes, I also would like to say, I mean, it's pure speculation, but my guess would also be that the voluntary carbon market will have to adjust to the compliance market, because overall, what we can say from compliance market is that they will list technologies that will be acceptable for trading under the market. So then these will also show the political signal and political support from governments towards these technologies, especially removals, since I was talking about removals before. So in my opinion, the voluntary carbon market will probably adopt the same methodology that will be accepted at the international level by country.
Who's speaking? Okay, good. I was kidding. Go ahead, please. No, go ahead. Yeah, I saw his voice of God.
I just want to mention that you just mentioned that the voluntary carbon market will be kind of trying out. Like we're facing the back and forth while doing the voluntary carbon market. I do agree with you as well. But seeing that given this situation, we don't have perfect answer. Like we are using the carbon market. Like if there is no need to, in terms of dealing with the climate crisis, we don't need the carbon market, but we need the market to as a means to, achieving our goals. So if there is another good answer, we can use that answer, but we don't have at the moment. So we have to somehow, keep the carbon market. But while doing this operate the carbon market, there are a lot of blanks, I think, the governance of regulations and transparency. So that's why we now talking about IT or digital technology and the governance from the ICVCM, VCMI. So I think, as I said before, we are just learning by doing at the moment. So I think that's why we have to cooperate each other. We have to bring all the opinions all over the world and NGOs and think tank as well. Yeah.
Well, we heard the voice from above telling us that we have 1 minute and 13 seconds. So I want to thank the panelists. Maria is not here, but again, she's running around and I know how it feels. But thank you all for being here. We all learn a little bit from each of these exercises. Sometimes you feel we don't have all the answers, but I think the answer is that we got to stop here because we have to be respectful from the next session. So thank you all again, and we'll see you soon. Thank you.